Hello and welcome back to I'm Not the Book Expert, but She Is. I am Rachel and I am not the expert.
And I'm Maggie, and I'm the expert for this season because we will be talking about Percy Jackson and the Olympians.
Indeed, there's so much to talk about.
Yes. Rachel, are you excited?
I don't know if I have an adequate vocabulary to describe how excited I am.
Okay, good, because I'm very, very, very excited. Um,
As you should
yeah,
be.
as I am very excited. If you haven't listened to our previous episode yet, that was kind of our season 2 introductory episode where we talked about our experiences when we read Percy Jackson and just like a general overview. We did some fun quizzes. We talked about the upcoming TV show. Um, yeah. So we did all kinds of stuff. If you haven't listened to that yet, go back and listen to it and then come back to this episode where we are going to talk about the first half of the first book, which is The Lightning Thief.
Indeed. Ah, I love it.
Yeah. But before we get into that, Rachel, what have you been reading lately?
So I have not read 50 or 40 books, however many books it was since the last time we talked. Uh,
Good.
I did meet my 100 reading goal for the school year, and I even got my reward from my student, so shout out to him. But since the last time we recorded, I have read Wrath of Blood Eye by Joseph Delaney, Tin by Candace Robinson, Ice Planet Barbarians by Ruby Dixon, and Disfigured on Fairy Tales, Disability, and Making Space by Amanda LeDuc. Right now, I'm reading two books, Truly Devious by Maureen Johnson, Are We Surprised? It's my monthly reread. And then I'm actually reading an arc right now, which I'm not going to say which one it is, but just know in the future I will probably talk about it.
Good, good, good. Yeah, that's right. You got into arcs recently, right?
I did. I went a little arc crazy and I have like six that I need to review coming up. So I'm slower than I want to be in processing through them, but I think once this week is over, because this is my last week before the end of the school year, I'll be able to start blowing through them a little faster.
Good, good. And for if anyone doesn't know, an ARC is an advanced reader copy or an advanced review copy,
Correct.
depending on who you ask. But it's basically an advanced copy of a book meant for like reviewers and
Mhm.
to build up hype and I don't know what the other word I'm looking for is interest in a book before
Yeah.
it is officially released.
Mhm.
So I haven't read too many books since the last time we recorded. I read The Golem and the Genie by Helene Wecker. I read Ray Bearer by Jordan E. Fueco. And I just started rereading For the Wolf by Hannah Witten because my copy of For the Throne came in the mail last week and I really want to read it. But I also have a horrible memory. So I'm listening to For the Wolf again to kind of refresh my memory.
You're welcome for forcing you to read that book.
Forcing sounds so violent, but it is accurate.
I forced you to buy the book.
Yeah. Yeah, that is in fact what did happen.
I'm only kind of sorry.
Only kind of.
Only kind of. But Maggie, do we have any upcoming Percy Jackson news?
So, just a little bit of news. And just for those of you listening along at home, one of the things I thought would be fun to do this season is because we've always got some Percy Jackson news, whether it's TV show stuff or like books being released that are kind of like tangentially related. I thought it would be interesting to kind of just give like a little like news update in some of our episodes. That said, we do record these episodes a little bit ahead of time, so it may
Mm-hmm.
not be the most up to date information, but we are still going to talk about it because it's well, it's not my podcast, it's
It's
our
our
podcast.
podcast,
It's our podcast, but I'm the expert and I decide what we're doing.
but I do the editing.
Yeah, so Rachel could censor me if she wanted to. She probably has. I have to confess, I don't always listen to our episodes after Rachel edits them because I trust her so much. But for all I know, she could be censoring me and I'd have no idea.
I usually do more censoring of myself than I do of you.
Really?
I do.
Interesting. Maybe it's so that she can make a fool of me,
Obviously, that is exclusively my intent.
obviously. So all that to say, here is your Percy Jackson slash Rick Riordan news roundup for this episode. So there isn't a whole lot of news about the Disney Plus TV show. We did get that like week one update where we got some of the side character casting, which was very exciting.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but Rick did share like some general updates on his website as sort of the week two update. He talks a little bit about like the day in the life of an executive producer, what it's like being on set, working in the writer's room, things like that. So no major news, and we'll link the whole article in the episode description. The really main thing that we learned, which we may have actually known already, I can't remember, is that right now they're really focusing on working on episodes 1 and 2 and then planning ahead for the rest of the season. So I know that's not like a big deal. It's not nearly as exciting as like we got more casting, but I find it very interesting, just those little updates, and it makes me more excited for the show.
I think that is more than fair, and I'm also very excited for the show.
Indeed. In sort of Rick Riordan adjacent news, we just had the release of The Last Fallen Moon by Gracie Kim, which was released under the Rick Riordan Presents imprint. If you're not familiar with this imprint, it is one that, according to Wikipedia, publishes books that utilize the mythology of various cultures and countries in its storytelling. Um, I remember a lot growing up because I would argue I've been a Percy Jackson fan a little bit longer than Rachel has. And I remember a lot of times growing up, people were always like, "Oh, Rick, when are you going to write about like this mythology, or you're going to write about that mythology? Like, I want stories about this because this is the culture like that my parents are from."
Mm-hmm.
And Rick decided, instead of writing those stories himself, partly because who he is only one person and can only write so many books, right? He's no you know what I was going to say? He's no James Patterson, but I don't want to invoke the name of James Patterson on this
I was gonna say,
podcast.
are you gonna say are you gonna say it?
um, yeah, so he's only one man. He's only got so much time to write books, and also, Rick Riordan is a white American man, and I think in a lot of ways he said like, these are not my stories to tell. So instead of writing these books himself, he has created this imprint for up and coming authors, a lot of times they're debut authors, to write myth related stories based on their own like cultural background,
Mm-hmm.
which I think is really cool. And I'm glad that like this next generation of middle grade readers has these books to read as well and to expand their horizons and all that stuff. But yeah, all that to say, they just had a recent book release, and again, that was The Last Fallen Moon by Gracie Kim. I believe that is the second book in a trilogy. I have not read these specific books, so I'm just going off of like the news release on their website.
Maggie, tangentially related to this, I have
Hmm.
met three Rick Riordan adjacent authors this year.
I know. Do you want to share who they are?
I can. So the most recent one I met was a week ago yesterday, and I met Orpheus. Cannot remember his last name. I think it might be Blake.
I don't actually know.
Please hold. I'm Googling it. Orpheus Collar. Where did I get Blake from? Doesn't
No
matter.
idea.
Doesn't matter. So I met him on Saturday a week ago. And then back in April, I met Rosie Brown, who wrote a song of Wraiths and Ruin, which I really liked, but she's also writing a Rick Riordan Presents book around Ghanaian traditions. And I'm really excited for that one. And I've also met Mark Oshiro, who is writing the next like Percy Jackson book with Rick Riordan.
Yeah, he's writing the Nico and Will book, as we
Mm-hmm.
all are calling it right now. Ah, here it is. Okay, so Rosie Brown or Roseanne Brown, depending on who you ask, Um, she is publishing a book. I did not research ahead of time, so you'll have to forgive me on my pronunciation. Um, Serwa Botang's Guide
Yes.
to Vampire Hunting,
Yes.
which is, it appears to be a middle grade novel. In her tweet, she says it is, if you ever watched Mean Girls and thought, this would be better with more vampires, then this is the book for you. It comes out on September 6th, 2022. The cover looks fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so that is another book to look forward to. And it is a middle grade debut novel about a preteen vampire slayer with a strong helping of Ghanaian folklore. So there's
I'm
something else
very
you can look
excited.
forward to. It looks like a really good read.
And she's just so sweet. I loved meeting her.
I know. You're so lucky. You got to meet so many cool people.
I have met this year alone, I have met 6 authors.
Rachel has all the fun. It's fine.
Rachel's just been like in the place to be for like no reason other than I said, "Hey, can I go to this?" Or somebody sent me a tweet, Maggie, and said, "Hey, Maureen Johnson is going to be here. I don't know how far away it is for you." And I said, "I don't care. It's in the state of Maryland. I will drive anywhere." And I did. So,
She surely did. Okay. So, before we get started really talking about Percy Jackson, I know we've got a lot of introduction, but I promise it'll be worth it in the end. I thought it would be fun this season. I think Rachel thinks it will be less fun, but again, I'm the expert and I'm deciding what we're doing.
just
Um,
know there will be revenge in later seasons.
I am sure. So I decided it would be fun to do a little bit of like Percy Jackson, Greek mythology trivia to sort of kick off the episode. And they'll all be related to what we're talking about in whatever part of whatever book we're discussing. So, Rachel, are you ready for today's trivia questions?
No, but let's go for it anyway.
I actually meant to put these in a different order, so I'm going to try to go in the correct order.
Okay.
Okay, so the first question is, during this book, Percy faces off with the Minotaur from Greek mythology.
Okay.
What is the Minotaur's actual name?
Okay, this one is an easy one because we play Hades,
Yes.
and the Minotaur is named in Hades. It's Asterius.
Yes, Asterius, or sometimes Asterion, depending on, I guess, which source you're reading it from.
Mhm.
But yes, the Minotaur is named Asterius. So there's a fun little fact for you,
A factoid.
a factoid. Okay, second question. The director at Camp Half Blood is Mr. D, also known as the god of wine, Dionysus. In some Greek myths, Dionysus has a lot of origin myths that we don't need to talk about right now, but in like one of the more well-known or one of the more like widely recognized, I guess,
Mm-hmm.
myths, Dionysus's life began as a demigod son of Zeus. What was the fate of his mortal mother, Selene? Semele? I think I don't remember how you say her name. It doesn't. Anyway, what was her fate?
Well, considering Zeus is terrible, I'm going to say she died, but I don't know how. So
I'll
I
give it to you because she did in fact die. Can you just wager a guess at whose hands did she die?
probably Hera.
You know what? I'll grant it to you. So the story is that you know, she had her little fling with Zeus, and Hera, of course, being Hera, gets jealous, and Hera tricks her into saying like, "Hey, is this man that you're seeing really a god? Like, if he was a god and he really loved you, he would do anything for you. He would show you his divine form." And so next time she meets with Zeus, she's like, "Can I ask you something?" And Zeus is like, "I'll do anything for you. I'll swear it on the river Styx. I'll do anything for you."
No.
Zeus is an idiot. Um, and basically, she asks, like, will you show me your divine form? And Zeus is like, oh, can you ask me anything but that? But of course, he's bound by the river Styx to comply now. And of course, in doing so, she is basically incinerated and dies. I know I sound very callous saying that, but it is unfortunate, as is the fate of most mortal lovers in Greek mythology.
Indeed.
Yeah. I'm sure we'll talk about more of those kinds of things throughout the season. But yeah, so there's a fun little factoid. Not really fun. These aren't entirely fun, but now you can impress all your friends and professors with your very niche Greek mythology knowledge. And finally, Rachel, this question comes from our mutual friend Lydia because I texted her and I said, Lydia, I need some mythology trivia about Medusa. And she really came through for me. So here's your question. What came first, Medusa or her decapitated head?
Okay, I'm gonna work with a little bit of older knowledge here. And by older,
Okay,
I just mean from a couple months ago.
that's older.
Okay, considering how many books I've read between then and now, yes, that is older knowledge.
Yes.
Um, so in Pandora's Jar, which is a nonfiction, like it's not even retelling, it's a nonfiction collection of the myths of the myths of females in Greek mythology. It's really hard
It's
for me.
like an essay collection almost, right?
Yeah. Each chapter focuses on a different female in Greek mythology. I believe that there can be a couple of ways of interpreting it where Medusa came first or the head came first, but overall, I think the consensus is that the decapitated head came first.
Yeah. Yeah, that's it. You got it. So, yeah, as Lydia put it in her message to me, she said that the myth of Medusa was most likely created to explain a common symbol known as the Gorgonea, or a decapitated head that was a symbol of protection in the wild.
Mm-hmm.
So, it seems likely that the myth of that Medusa was sort of like, I was like, well, we need to explain this symbol somehow. And it's like, hey, we'll just have this snake lady do it.
Snake lady.
hmm When all else fails, choose the snake lady.
I think that's fair.
So, Rachel, I'm gonna say you're 3 for 3 right now.
I'm proud of myself.
The first one was a little dicey because you didn't give me like specifics, but I'd say you're close enough.
I mean, it would be a fair. I feel like I just went with the most generic options I could have because it's
Mhm.
Zeus, so they probably died, and then it's
Yes.
Hera, she probably killed them. But
hmm
I'm gonna take the W. I'm gonna take the W, and I'm not gonna argue with it.
Take the W. We all need more W's in our lives.
I am prepared for the trivia portion to go rapidly downhill from here.
Eh, have more faith in yourself.
Okay.
Rachel,
Yes.
are you ready to talk about Percy Jackson?
Yeah.
Would you like to read our little synopsis slash summary of the first half of The Lightning Thief?
I would love to. In the first half of The Lightning Thief, we're introduced to Percy Jackson, a self proclaimed troubled kid. After a strange encounter at school, Percy returns home for the summer only to learn that the danger has followed him there. He escapes to Camp Half Blood, where he discovers that the Greek gods aren't as imaginary as he thought, and one of them appears to be his father. Not only that, but Zeus's master lightning bolt has been stolen, and Percy is the accused culprit. Percy, alongside his best friend Grover Underwood and new frenemy Annabeth Chase, must travel across the United States in search of the Master Bolt, fighting monsters along the way.
And we will find out who those monsters are in a
Due
few
time?
minutes.
Yeah.
In due time. In due time. And just because we always want to be mindful of trigger warnings, we do have a couple of trigger warnings for this book. Abusive relationships, specifically a parental abusive relationship,
Mhm.
or abusive relationships involving at least one parent. There's also death and murder involved. So just be mindful of those things. I will say again, this is a middle grade book, but that doesn't mean we're not talking about deep or sometimes triggering topics. So,
Mm-hmm.
just be aware of that as you read these books. So, I thought we would get started talking about the major characters of this book, and then we'll kind of go more in depth onto some of the major plot points. So, let's start with Percy. Um, as Rachel said in the summary, Percy is a self proclaimed troubled kid. He says at the beginning of the book, "Am I a troubled kid? Yeah, I guess you could say that." And that just kind of sets up a lot of his personality in just a few words.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but Rachel, I think you have some thoughts about this.
You mean considering I wrote like a good chunk in our little notes there?
Mm
No one says, especially when they actually are a problem, that they are a problem, right? Like, especially kids are not going to describe themselves as problematic, which means that Percy has heard this on a semi regular basis that he is a problem child. And he is so not a problem child. It fills me with rage. Like, first of all, Percy would be a duckling of mine, right? Second
hmm.
of
Agreed.
all, he would be one of my kids that I think would tell me about what is going on in his life.
Mm hmm.
And I would be absolutely destroyed and devastated. And I would literally fight the world for him.
Rachel, we're only like 20 minutes into the podcast. You can't make me cry already.
Uh, Sorry. At least, no, we haven't made it further in this recording.
We have not made it further in this
Last one.
recording. Um, I'll pull back the curtain on you guys a little bit. This is actually take 2 of this episode because the first time we started to record, I just had a mental breakdown and started sobbing in the middle of the episode. And Rachel's like, "Do you want to just try recording from the beginning again?" And I was like, "Yeah, that might be a good idea."
Uh, in Maggie's defense, I also said something that made her cry, but I wouldn't say I was the exclusive reason that you cried.
It was a rough day. Last Tuesday was a rough day,
It
guys.
was very much a rough day for both of us. I would argue that you had a more difficult day, but it was a rough
Yes.
day just kind of all around.
Yeah. And you know what? Sometimes you just got to go to bed and wake up the next day and say, let's try this again another time.
Indeed. So now we are recording not on our normal record day, but we both have the next day off. So we said, might as well.
Woo. But yeah, going back to Percy, like, I am definitely with you about that. Like, who hurt this child? And it's just, I think the older I get, the more frustrating it is to like see how, especially in the early chapters, like we know that Percy doesn't get along with his stepdad Gabe, right? Like we know
Mhm.
that there is not a good relationship here. That is obvious. But like the little ways in which like he mentions like how some of his teachers treat him, how he's treated by like his peers, and just this kid is not getting the support that he needs. Forgetting the fact that he's a demigod for a second, right? He's just not getting like the academic support he needs or the like emotional and social support that he needs. He only really has one friend, and that's Grover.
Maggie, I'm going to bring up our last recording as well because I had that really good rant about the academic support and like social emotional support that Percy needs. Would you be okay
Mhm.
if I like spliced that into here? Because I don't know
Yes.
if I can remember everything I said, but I also think it's really important.
Yes, you should splice it into here for
Okay,
sure.
thank you. Can I go on a little tangent here?
Absolutely.
Okay, so I am a teacher, right? We know this. I
Yes.
talk about it all the time.
I'm shocked.
Um, where are Percy's accommodations, right? He
Mm-hmm.
has ADHD and he has dyslexia. Like, those
Yep.
are statements of fact. He knows that. Where is his 504 plan? Where is his IEP? Like, these are legally, like, federally required documents for students with disabilities so they can receive accommodations. So these
Mm-hmm.
situations don't happen. So where are they and why do they not exist? And why is Percy not getting the services that he obviously desperately needs? Right? And if he's such a problem child, why doesn't he have a behavior improvement plan? Like, as an educator, this just drives me crazy because he should have so many built in resources, and every single teacher and every single educator and every professional that has ever worked with him, in my mind, has failed him.
Mm-hmm. Um, yeah, so there's something pretty screwed up about Yancey Academy, and I've noticed that Yancey is the school that Percy is attending in this book. There's something really like messed up about this because even like Percy mentions, his grades are failing, and then he says, finally, when our English teacher, Mr. Nickel, asked me for the millionth time why I was too lazy to study for spelling tests, I snapped. And that's what gets Percy expelled. Like, that's the last straw. And I'm like, why would you, first of all, why would you say that to a child whom you know it has a disability?
Yep.
And
Why would you say that to any child
why
at
would
any
you say
point?
that to anyone? Period. Why would you say that to someone whom you know has a disability? And why it makes me mad. I don't have words. I'm just like waving my hands erratically.
I don't know what makes me more mad, this or going all the way back to Vicious and like looking at my rant about Selena there. Like, which one makes me more mad?
Yeah. We're gonna have to do like a special Rachel's Rants episode, where we just compile your best tangents and rants.
I just, it makes my heart hurt because I have had so many students like Percy, right? Where like they have dyslexia or they have ADHD or they have both or they have some other intellectual disability, and watching them go from a student who is more failing to watching them grow into a student who is extremely successful with just a couple of modifications. Like, I'm not asking for them to completely revolutionize how they teach. I'm asking for them to give him basic accommodations.
Mm-hmm.
Ugh. If they were
The
real and I ever saw them, I would throw hands.
the bar is on the floor, people.
And we are playing Limbo in Hell right now.
Yes, we are. But let's talk about some other things about Percy. Are you okay if I move on here?
Yes, let's move.
I think one of the things is that another thing about Percy is that he is a lot more snarky and bitter than I think sometimes we remember him being. And remember,
Mhm.
this kid is 12 now. I have also met some very jaded 12-year-olds. I was probably a jaded 12-year-old, not for the same reasons. I was just
A 12-year-old.
because of who I am as a person. Um but yeah, just the way Percy talks about like himself and like other things, and part of that has to do with he has not received the support that he needs, but also like he's justifiably a little bitter about some things. Like his life is not super great. He's taking what he can,
Mhm.
but overall he hasn't had it easy. Percy is also extremely loyal to his friends and family. And this is something we see early on. Like his only other friend is Grover at this school. They've met at this school. Grover is his only friend. Grover is a little bit timid and can be kind of awkward, so he's often the target of bullying. And even though Percy isn't really like the biggest kid or the toughest kid, like he always stands up for Grover, even when it means like he's gonna bear the brunt of the bullying, right?
Yes.
And I think this is a very key part of his character, and it's very obviously a key part of his character. I don't know if this is a spoiler, but later on in the series, it's outlined that loyalty is Percy's quote unquote fatal flaw, which we can talk about more when we get to that. But like, this is a very clearly big part of
Yeah.
Percy's
Who he
character.
is. Yeah.
And even when Percy and Grover and Sally are trying to like flee from the Minotaur, and everyone's like, Percy, just go so you can be safe. And Percy's like, I'm not leaving any of you guys behind. And he like goes back and makes sure like his mom is okay and that Grover's okay. And he never leaves anybody behind, even when it means putting himself in danger.
Right.
And I really love that about him.
Yeah. He's a no man left behind type of person.
Exactly.
And by no man, I don't mean exclusively people of the male gender. I mean
Yes.
all humans.
No human left
Eh,
behind.
But
Well,
but
not
it's
even
not even human.
because Grover's a satyr.
No individual left behind.
No person. Can you call someone a person if they're not human?
I don't know.
Because I feel like person is broader than human.
Right, but I feel like person still brings up like a humanoid.
Yeah,
He
okay. Let's go with individual.
yeah. No one left behind.
Oh, yeah, there we
There
go.
we go.
I'm glad it took us our collective brain power to come to that point.
Indeed.
But since we've been talking about Grover, I want to talk about Grover a little bit more. Um, he is pretty timid. So Grover is a satyr, and at Camp Half Blood, the satyrs, they are a half man, half goat creature, and they are the ones who go into the mortal world and try to find demigods and bring them to Camp Half Blood where they can be safe.
Hmm.
Um, and Grover is the one who has found Percy and is sort of like staying with him to make sure he stays safe. And eventually, he's the one who helps bring him to Camp Half Blood. Um, so Grover can seem pretty timid, but he is also pretty brave in his own way, I think.
100% agree.
And spoiler alert, he's also dealing with quite a bit of like personal guilt, not really over something that is his fault, but over something that he feels like is his fault.
Well, it's something that he's been told is his fault, even if it isn't.
Right. That's probably more accurate.
I
So,
I will fight the elders. I would throw hands with them. Just
oh,
gonna
the
put that
Elder
out there.
Council of Satyr
Yes.
people?
Yes.
Yeah. So, before Percy was really on the scene, Grover was tasked with bringing another demigod back to camp, and her name was Talia. Um, And Talia was traveling with two other demigods, Annabeth, who we'll talk about in a minute, and Luke, who we'll also talk about in a minute. Um, and Grover was the one who was bringing all three of them back to camp.
Hmm.
But some things didn't quite go as planned, and there were monsters chasing them. And right as they got to the camp border, Talia made her final stand against the monsters, and as a result, she lost her life and Zeus turned her into a tree, a magical tree that would help protect the camp borders.
But Grover's sole job was to bring Talia to camp.
Yeah. And I mean, he did fail in that task, even though it wasn't his fault, even though Talia is the one who chose to stay. And so Grover's feeling a lot of guilt about that. And he's worried that if Percy knew this about him, Percy would not want to be his friend anymore.
Which I think is a very well, it's a very human emotion, right? To
Hmm.
think that, oh, if this person knew everything about me, they wouldn't like me.
Right.
But it's also very much like a teenage problem, like middle school, high school problem of, oh, if they knew
Hmm.
everything about me, they still wouldn't like me.
And, Percy's on this quest so that he can clear his name, right? Grover's on this quest, one, because Percy's his friend, but also Grover is kind of looking for some personal redemption
Mhm.
as well.
I'm really excited for when we do the Lightning Thief musical bonus episode because he
Yes.
has one of my favorite songs, and I put the lyrics in there just as like a here's some more like defense of your
Hmm.
point, but I will save my thoughts about that for our musical episode.
I like this plan. I'm excited to talk about the musical too. All right, so that's two of the main trio. Let's talk about our third, Annabeth Chase. Annabeth is a daughter of Athena. I have specifically not talked about Percy's godly parent yet because I want to get to that in a little bit. Um, so Annabeth is a daughter of Athena. Her father is mortal, and he's a professor somewhere. She does not have a very good relationship with her mortal family. She came to camp as a very young child. She was like 7. So she's been at camp a long time, longer than a lot of the other campers, even though she's younger than some of them. I will say there's a couple of ways in which The Lightning Thief, so The Lightning Thief was published in 2005. There's a couple of ways in which this book shows its age, and one of them is how Annabeth kind of gives off these not like other girls kind of vibes. So yeah. So I don't know if you were around in I don't even know what to describe it as. Like mid to late 2000s, early 2010s era of YA fiction when you
Mm-hmm.
had all of these like female main characters who were all like, I'm not like other girls, not explicitly, but like that was the vibe. Like, I'm not like other girls. I don't like dresses. I like shooting things and like boy stuff because I'm better than them. And I'm realize I'm being very aggressive there and I'm sorry. But like that was kind of like a trend in a way
Well,
and it's
yeah. Well, can I provide some examples of who I think would fit in your categories?
go for it.
Katniss Everdeen, right, from the
Mhm.
Hunger Games, Triss from Divergent.
Mhm.
The characters from this is probably super like niche, but Every Soul a Star, I think would fit in there.
I strongly agree.
Stargirl from Stargirl and Love Stargirl, like
Mhm.
Jerry Spinelli had the market on that.
Yeah.
So
And that's not
all I'm saying is I think you're making a fair statement.
mhm. And that's not to say that those characters are bad or even that those books that they're from are bad
Mhm.
objectively. Like there's a lot they have to offer, but there is a sort of like toxic how do I say this? It sort of came from this up until that point in fiction, a lot of times girls were relegated to like a very limited set of roles, right? You
Yes.
did not have a ton of fiction in which women and girls, especially girls of like a teenage age, I guess, were allowed to be the heroes of a story. They weren't really like the face of a story. They were usually relegated to a side character role or like a
Mhm.
love interest kind of thing. Or if they were the main character, then their stories were kind of limited in scope. You would get like your historical fiction maybe, but it would have more like there wasn't as much like of
There
that
was
in
more
sci-fi.
damsel in distress, yeah.
Yeah. So I think this idea of like the character who's not like other girls came as a response to that. And in some ways that was helpful where we did finally get to see, especially in speculative fiction, girls getting to be heroes. However, I just whacked my mic, sorry. However, then it kind of fell into sort of a toxic side where it was like, these are the only girls who are valid, and we don't anyone who like any female character who prefers like a more traditionally feminine by Western standards kind of role is thereby less valuable, which
Right.
is also problematic.
Right.
So, all that to say, Annabeth has a little bit of those like not like other girls vibes, which
Mhm.
I think is more of a product of the time because she does grow out of it even by the end of this book and especially by the end of the Percy Jackson and the Olympian series.
I think part of it is because she grows more into her confidence, right? Like she doesn't have
Mhm.
to play up any particular side of herself to be seen as strong and feminine, right? Like
Right.
she has that opportunity to grow and is very much a complex character and just as complex as Percy and Grover.
I really love Annabeth. And I know a lot of times because Percy is the narrator of these books, right? So we talk a lot about Percy's arc as a character. But Annabeth also has a really good character arc. And I think I think it is just as complex as you were saying, Rachel, but it's also I think some of the beauty of it is how it is a little bit more understated.
Mm-hmm.
Like Annabeth's growth in confidence in herself and not feeling this pressing need to prove herself all the time, because she always feels like, well, I'm a daughter of Athena. I have to be the most intelligent. I have to be the best at everything. And her kind of leaning into her imperfections almost and letting herself be more of who she is rather than who her parents, whether they're mortal or godly, expect her to be.
Mm-hmm.
I know we're getting ahead of ourselves, but I really love Annabeth.
Because Annabeth is delightful. She is
She,
maybe my favorite demigod other than Percy.
I can get behind that.
Uh, I am excluding a particular character that we have not yet met.
That's okay. I know who you're talking about, and that's what matters.
Indeed.
So those are our main trio. We also have Sally Jackson, Percy's mother. She's a literal goddess, actually perfect. Cannot say enough about how much I love her.
Agreed.
I have I've told Rachel about this before, but I'm going to tell her again. I do have a minor headcanon about Sally.
I'm sorry, that's not what you wrote in the notes.
I have a headcanoon about Sally.
And for anyone
Um,
who doesn't know, I misspelled headcanon once on my phone. I corrected myself before I sent it, but then I did confess my misspelling, and from then on, it has been headcanoon.
I also want to point out that I think you almost said hand cannon a second ago.
It wasn't intentional, so possibly.
Hand canoon. Anyway, I think Sally is a little bit of a mythology nerd. And I only say that because of the scene where they're trying to escape the Minotaur, and Percy's like, "Hey, wait, that's the Minotaur," and everyone's like, "Percy, you can't say his name. It's forbidden. Names have power. All that stuff. Yada yada yada." And Sally refers to the Minotaur as Pasiphae's son. Pasiphae is the mother of the Minotaur. That's a mythology. That is a fact from mythology. Um, but I feel like most people don't know that, or they know that the Minotaur was born of a human mother, but they don't necessarily know her name. So what I think is Sally Jackson, either because she was kind of like a wannabe like she wanted to be a writer, and I personally think of her as like a honorary English major if she had gone to college. I can see her like being like really into mythology, like having a Greek mythology phase in her teenage years, but maybe that's just me projecting. Or when she found out that her child was going to be a demigod, she was like, I need to read up on like mythology so that I can know how to protect my child and my family, because the father is not going to be in the picture here. Percy is definitely a mama's boy.
I would say that if you looked up Mama's Boy in the dictionary, it would just show a picture of Percy Jackson.
A Perkshire of Percy.
A picture of Percy.
But yeah, Percy just loves his mom. And you know what? I love that for him. When we meet Sally in the book, we start off,
What
if
page are we
I
on?
can find it, we are on page 29 in the paperback. Um, and that's at the beginning of chapter 3 when we finally get to meet Sally. A word about my mother before you meet her. Her name is Sally Jackson, and she's the best person in the world. And he goes on to talk about like some of her background and how like she's had really bad luck. And then we talk a little bit about Percy's very vague memories of his birth father, which is a good transition to the man, the myth, the legend, Poseidon.
That's not who I thought you were going to talk about next, but I'll take it.
Really?
Yep.
I'm just going with it. I'd rather. I'm procrastinating a little bit on the person that we do need to eventually talk about. But yeah, we find out about like a quarter of the way into the book that Percy is the son of Poseidon, the sea god from Greek mythology. You were gonna say something.
Well, this is unrelated to what I was going to say initially, but I don't even remember what I was going to say initially.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, can we take a brief aside and talk about what Rick Riordan wanted to name this book or title
Oh
this book?
yes.
So
Please tell us.
when you're a writer, sometimes you can get some tunnel vision, right? Like you know what happens in the story, so
Mm-hmm.
it's fine, right?
Mm-hmm.
Uncle Rick was like, yes, I should title this book Son of Poseidon.
I think it was son of the sea god, actually.
Regardless.
Regardless.
And then I just imagine this one little brave soul in his class like raising their hand and being like, um, that kind of spoils the whole book. And then him, again, this is all my mental image of how this story goes, just going, gosh darn it! I have zero actual foundation for that being how the events actually played out, but just know that is how they play out in my head.
As they should. The book was originally titled The Son of the Sea God, but it was changed after feedback from Rick Riordan's students stating it spoiled who Percy's father was. And you know what? I respect those students. And I also understand the sometimes when you're a writer, you just don't you kind of lose track of where you came from.
I cannot even begin to tell you how many times I've gone through my document and like searched the last name of a character just because I
Mhm.
couldn't remember who they were.
Yep, been there, done that. So we don't actually meet Poseidon in this first half of the book. So there isn't really much to say about him right now, but we will talk a little bit more about how Percy feels about his father as we talk about the plot of the book. Um, we do unfortunately need to discuss Percy's other mortal family member, his stepfather, Gabe. In short, he sucks. And that is a tame description of him.
He is on the insta kill list of fictional characters. So
Mm-hmm.
he's up there with the Darkling and the Apparat from Shadow and Bone. Like
That's pretty high on the list.
on site, Maggie.
I know.
I This is interesting. I'm staring at my bookshelf, looking at all of my books and thinking like what other characters would be up there. And it's those
Mm-hmm.
characters obviously since I stated that. But then it's also like Serena from Vicious. And that's all I can think of.
Interesting.
But I'm also just looking at the books that I can see. So that's kind of biased. Oh, the king from the Merciful Crow and the Faithless Hawk, but that's I feel like that's just a given. We already know that.
We've talked at length about that. I think actually, see last season.
Yeah, I there are no other characters that are like coming to the forefront of my brain right now, but yeah, no. Instant
Hmm,
on site. He can go die in a hole by himself.
that's fair. Um, I don't want to give a lot of screen time to Gabe because he's horrible. What you need to know about him is that he's awful, he is abusive, and we don't see a lot of that explicitly take place, but there are definitely references to that happening.
Mm-hmm.
He is not a good parent, and Percy does not like him, and rightfully so. And that's all I have to say about Gabe.
Yep.
Um, and then when we get to Camp Half Blood, we get introduced to a couple of other side characters, we have Mr. Brunner slash Chiron. So Chiron is the camp activities director, and he has been training demigods for millennia. He does appear in disguise at Percy's school, because Percy is a special case that required extra observation. So I'm not sure how well Chiron did with that job because he did seem to miss that there was a Fury in their school disguised as a teacher. So I'm not sure how I feel about Chiron's monster sensing skills, but you know what? He did his best and Percy didn't die, so I guess it's a mission success.
Uh, or he was intentionally choosing to not be aware and letting things play out naturally.
I dislike that answer even more.
I'm sorry, I didn't do it.
It's okay. Because if he did, isn't his job to protect the demigods?
Yes, but I feel like Chiron was also trying to protect Percy from discovering that he was a demigod, because once they know they're demigods, their scent gets stronger.
But by doing so, he put Percy in immediate danger.
I didn't say I had a good answer. Also, in defense of Chiron, as a teacher, sometimes I have no idea who else is in my building, right? So, like, on the field trip, I guess he should have been more aware, but also it is a field trip, and I have chaperoned a field trip before, and I never want to do that again. So, take that how you will.
Rachel, I mean this lovingly. You are also not a immortal centaur who's been training demigods for millennia. I I I like Chiron. I am going to say that. But I I will cut you more slack than I would cut him.
Um, Maggie, who's to say I'm not an immortal centaur?
Is there something you're not telling me?
I don't know. Is there?
We can talk about that later. The other main staff member at Camp Half Blood is Mr. D, also known as the god Dionysus, god of wine, revelry, madness, you name it. He does it. He is there as a punishment because he chased after a nymph that Zeus had his eye on, and Zeus was like, "Hey, you can't do that," and cursed him to serve, what was it, like 100 years as the camp director.
Yep.
Um, we can talk more about how Zeus is horrible later. Um, but Rachel, do you have anything to say about Mr. D?
I have a lot of complex feelings about Mr. D.
Hmm.
That kind of unfold throughout the series. So we'll talk
Yeah,
about it like each book. Um, I'm going to swear, so if you're not wanting to hear that, beware. But he is an asshole, and I still love him, and that pisses me off.
I'm sorry.
I shouldn't love assholes, and yet here I am.
I'm sorry, this is me being a 12-year-old child, but the out of context Rachel, I shouldn't love assholes. Rachel Laurie, 2022.
Uh, I was intentional with my word choice there.
That's fair.
I have lots of Dionysus feelings, and he pisses me off. I think he pisses me off the most in the next book,
Hmm.
but we can talk about that when we talk about the next book.
When we talk about the next book.
Indeed.
All right. And then there's two other like key demigod players in this book. We have Clarice, who's just kind of a generic bully character.
She's a very flat character in this book.
Yeah. She is the daughter of Ares, the god of war. Um and this is another place where I do kind of feel like the Lightning Thief shows its age a little bit because she does read as a generic like mid 2000s bully stereotype character, and
Hmm.
she does like get more developed as the series goes on, but like in this book I'm like, Clarice, you just ain't doing it for me. I do like Clarice, and I do kind of appreciate, I shouldn't say I appreciate, I don't like bully characters obviously, but I do think it adds an interesting like complex layer that it is a female character,
Hmm.
whereas normally you would have like the tough jock guy be like the jerk. Um so like I don't know if that like changes anything, but I do think it was like, huh, that's a difference. So
I think it's interesting that Clarice is a daughter of Ares, and B, the kind of bully character, because in Greek mythology, Ares is very much a supporter of strong female, with like female characters in Greek
mhm.
mythology.
Yes. I think I remember reading somewhere, and again, forgive me if I'm wrong, that Ares was the patron god of the Amazons, who
Yes, he
were
was.
a group of female warriors. You may be familiar with them from the Wonder Woman movies
Hmm.
because Diana is a Amazon. Now the Wonder Woman movies do mix up their mythology a little bit, but it's fine. But all you need to know is women fighting things. Ares liked them,
Yes, and that
so
is
there's
accurate.
that.
I only know that because I read Pandora's Jar.
Oh, good. Hey, we I have not read Pandora's Jar yet. I'm waiting for it to come in at the library.
Highly recommend. Very good.
I'm excited to read it. Um, and finally, let's talk a little bit about Luke. When we first meet him, he's the head counselor of the Hermes cabin. His father is Hermes, the messenger god, also kind of like a jack of all trades kind of god. Um, he is one of the other characters whom we see show a lot of bitterness towards kind of the gods and the way things are.
Hmm.
He he's trying to be like a good mentor to Percy because Percy is one of his campers at the beginning. Anyone who comes to camp unclaimed gets put in the Hermes cabin because Hermes is also the god of travelers
Yep.
and thieves. So there's that. Um
And doctors.
and doctors, yes.
Yes, not medicine, but the god of doctors.
Yes. Also, Rachel, I just had a weird epiphany. I don't know
Yes.
why I didn't think. I'm sure this has been thought of before. Why didn't anyone like the book is called The Lightning Thief. Why did we not look in the Hermes cabin to start with?
Freaking right?
Like, why why was everyone like, oh, it has to be like the son of one of the child of one of the big three, even though we can't think of any who exist except for this one kid who might be. And everyone's like, yeah, you know that cabin full of people who are like descended from the god of thieves? We can ignore them.
Right? And mm,
I know it's for like plot writing reasons, but also like where were all y'all's heads at?
yeah, like come on. First of all, like how would Percy even have gotten into Mount Olympus?
Exactly.
Right? Like, and then they're all like, "Oh, he was doing it independently or he was doing it by the request of his father." Like he hasn't even talked to his father. And
Right.
there has to be some sort of magical way of like exuding the truth from someone, but
Hmm.
no, we cannot use it. I just hmm,
Yeah, it's a little complicated.
I'm fine.
It's fine. Do you have anything else you want to say about Luke? I think we'll talk about him more in part two of the book, but I just wanted to
I
mention him here.
will have a lot to say about him at the end of this book
Okay,
because I don't want to accidentally spoil anything.
that's fair. Shall we go through some of the plot points real quick?
Let's do it.
So we've already talked about parts of the plot like in the episode, but there were a couple like scenes that I wanted to talk about. We've talked about the encounter with the Fury at the Met. And we have talked about why doesn't Mr. Brenner do anything? I think we've talked about Chiron's questionable choices at length. Um, but I just wanted to say, Percy gets freaking gaslit by everyone, and I know they're trying to protect him, but he's like, what about Mrs. Dodds? Like, she called me into the museum, and then she was like a monster, and then I killed her, and they're all like, Percy, we've never had a teacher named Mrs. Dodds. And Percy's like, the heck are you talking about?
Poor
I'm sorry, I'm
Percy.
screaming. He's just very confused, and I know that they're trying to protect him by not telling him anything, but at the same time, he gets really hurt by some of the things that they say to him and that he overhears others saying about him. Like
Mm-hmm.
when Percy gets expelled from Yancey Academy, where he's been going to school, Mr. Brunner's like, "This wasn't like the place for you. This isn't where you fit in." And Percy's like, "Oh, okay," because Mr. Brunner has been his favorite teacher here, and all of a sudden, his favorite teacher is telling him, like, "Yeah, I kind of expected you to like fail here."
Yeah.
And of course, what he means is
You're a demigod. You don't belong in a human school.
right. But he can't say that. And wouldn't things have been so much better if they could have just told him?
If there was a form of open communication, Maggie, so many book problems would be solved if people were just honest and like straight up with what they say.
Yep.
You
Ain't
know,
that the truth?
that might be why I like Stevie from Truly Devious so much, is that she just says it how it is.
Mm-hmm.
And she also gets confused when people don't just say it how it is.
I would also argue that Percy is similar, not necessarily in tone, but Percy is also kind of like a tell it like it is
Yeah.
kind of person. Like anytime someone's like, "Oh, we can't talk about that because we can't invoke the gods," and Percy's like, "I don't give a crap. Like I'm just gonna like."
He
He
fits
has
the
a sort
TikTok
of
sound.
yeah, exactly. He doesn't like. I don't want to say he doesn't have a filter, but I think he has a certain level of not callousness, but like carelessness where he's like, you know what? What's the worst that can happen?
I die, and it's already gonna happen anyway, so
Yeah. Anyway, so after being expelled from Yancey Academy, Percy returns home for the summer. That's when we meet Sally and Gabe. We don't like them. We've talked about them long enough. Um,
we like Sally. We don't
we
like
like
Gabe.
Sally. We do not
Yes.
like Gabe. I can talk about Sally Jackson for
We could
hours.
have an entire podcast dedicated exclusively to Sally.
Correct. I want to talk a little bit about the Minotaur like fight slash chase scene because there's one scene that really cracks me up for some reason. Like I know they're all in mortal peril and everything, but it just kills me. And I'm gonna find it again. Please hold. So while Grover and Percy were leaving school together, they saw the three fates. They cut a string. Grover flipped out because when the fates cut a string, that means someone's about to die. Or as the conversation between Percy and Grover, as Sally is madly driving them away from the Minotaur, goes. Um,
What page are we on?
we are on page 46 of the paperback. Sally says, "Please, dear, this is hard enough. Try to understand. You're in danger." Percy says, "Because some old ladies cut yarn." "Those weren't old ladies," Grover said. "Those were the fates. Do you know what it means, the fact that they appeared in front of you? They only do that when someone's about to die." "Whoa, you said you." "No, I didn't. I said someone." "You meant you, as in me. I meant you like someone, not you. Boys," my mom said. And like I know that they're in mortal danger, but I can just see Sally like gripping the steering wheel, trying to drive through the dark to escape this Minotaur. Meanwhile, her 12-year-old son and his best friend are bickering in the back seat over like the syntax of a sentence. And I can just see her like, "Could you please shut up?" And I know she would never say that, but like I appreciate the levity in an otherwise stressful situation.
Very much so.
But Rachel, do we want to talk a little bit about the end of this scene because it's a pretty big deal?
Oh, it makes me sad. Okay, for context, We got to the end of this chapter last time, and this is where we had to stop.
Yes, because again, I had a mental breakdown and was sobbing on record.
And
There's a recording of me crying somewhere. It's fine.
it was all my fault too, and I feel really bad about it.
Please don't feel bad. I'm playing it for laughs now, so you can't feel bad.
I mean, I can feel bad.
I refuse to let you feel bad. Rachel, I'm the expert, so this is my episode, and I command you to stop feeling bad. Anyway, at the end of this chapter, Percy is trying to escape the Minotaur. Um, he refuses to leave Sally and Grover behind, even though they're both like, "You need to go and get to the border of the camp where you'll be safe." Percy says, "I'm not going without you." And in the chaos that ensues, Sally is taken by the Minotaur. Um, she doesn't. We don't see her die, but she's gone. She vanishes.
Into like a puddle of sparkles.
Yes, something like that. Rachel, you had a note about this scene though in our little outline.
Oh yes. Uh it kind of relates back to the annotation that shall not be named. Um but Percy's first instinct, even after losing his mom, is to save Grover. Like, he is the definition of the like police slogan of to serve and protect.
Mm-hmm.
Percy is the like the quintessential definition of that. His first instinct is to go and protect and save everyone he knows and anyone he loves.
Mm-hmm. He and Grover do make it over the border. And Percy is, of course, distressed because he's just lost his mom.
You missed a big thing
And
there. They didn't just
yeah,
make it over the border. Percy defeated the Minotaur and then made it over the border.
correct. Sorry, I forgot. I that was in my head so clearly that I forgot that I had not said it out loud.
Yeah, so the Minotaur takes Percy's mom. Percy defeats the Minotaur, and then they start running to the farmhouse.
Mm-hmm. He and Grover make it to safety. Percy's crying for his mom. It makes me very emotional. We're not going to talk anymore about that. Um, and then Percy wakes up in Camp Half Blood. And we get a little bit of like a world building crash course with Mr. D, who, in a true I don't like to work with children manner, um, kind of explains how the gods and sort of interact with the quote unquote real world.
Mm-hmm.
Um, there's some interesting things here that I don't want to go too in depth about, but there is one that I kind of want to talk about a little bit because I have a lot of strong opinions about it. But there's an interesting thing where, like, so Chiron says something about, like, oh, yeah, the gods are real. And Percy's like, oh, you mean like God is real? And they're like, well, no, 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 that's different. And they kind of give some world building about, like, the gods of Greek mythology are more like very powerful, immortal beings, not so much like God as in like the metaphysical or religious sense, as they kind of put it. Um, so there's that little thing, which I'm sure more intelligent people could talk about, but that's not really of great interest to me. A little bit of talking about like how science and mythology interact in the world, because they're like, well, like you said that, like we learned in science class that the sun is like that the earth goes around the sun and that's what causes like the day and night cycle. It's not because Apollo's driving his sun chariot across the sky, like obviously. um and they're like, well, it's kind of complicated, so there's a little bit of like just kind of building out some of the world there and how they interact. But the one thing that really gets me to think about is they're talking about Mount Olympus, and Percy's like, there's such a thing. This is on page 72 of the paperback. He's like, whoa, Mount Olympus is real? And it's like, well, yeah, I mean, there's like the actual mountain in Greece, but like the palace of Mount Olympus moves with what they call Western civilization. And there's a whole. So Chiron says this. He says, "Come now, Percy, what you call Western civilization. Do you think it's just an abstract concept? No, it's a living force, a collective consciousness that has burned bright for thousands of years. The gods are part of it. You might even say they are the source of it, or at least they are tied so tightly to it that they couldn't possibly fade, not unless all of Western civilization were obliterated." Then he says it started in Greece, then Rome, then Germany, France, Spain, England, now in the United States. And I just have very complicated feelings about that concept of like, I'm trying to think of the best way to say it.
I think it's another spot where this book is definitely showing its age because a lot of people who are thinking critically about literature like this would not say that America is the definition of the West in today's global society.
Yeah. In the year of our Lord 2022, sorry, I don't know. I say that as a meme, not as a measurement of
Right.
time. We don't necessarily think of the United States as the heart of Western civilization.
Hmm.
Um, and rightfully so, I would say. But the implication of that, like, well, civilization has been in like America and Western Europe and like places that you think of as like civilized places, right? That feels a little icky. And oh, there's a good SAT word that I wrote down here, Eurocentric. But on the other hand, we do see, and I think we'll talk about this more in the next episode, we do kind of see this idea that gets presented here by Chiron be challenged by other characters.
Hmm.
Um, so I think it becomes a question of, yes, it's obviously a product of its time. Like, I think if The Lightning Thief was rewritten in today's world, you probably wouldn't see this kind of idea presented, or at least in this way. But at the same time, I have to wonder if is this something that like the book was actually claiming, or was it just presenting it in order to argue against it?
I think that that is a great question that we, as who we are, as in you and me, are not
Hmm.
going to figure out the answer to.
Correct.
I wonder if instead of like if we were to rewrite it today, if instead of saying like the heart of the West, we would say more like the pinnacle of innovation or something like that, where we
Hmm.
see the this like increase of certain things coming out of different areas, right? Because if we followed kind of the Eurocentric timeline of things, right? We kind of have this movement from Greece all the way over, continuing west until we reach
Right.
America, right?
Right.
And then we have westward expansion and all of that. But I personally don't know how Rick Riordan would rewrite this today, and I think that's going to be something that we will get to see in the Lightning or in the Percy Jackson TV show, with the first season being the Lightning Thief.
Hmm. Yeah, I am interested to see how the TV show will handle that, or if it will like approach that issue at all.
I do think we're going to need an explanation as to like why it's so prevalent in North America, but I don't necessarily think that it needs to be like the biggest point that this is making.
Hmm. I almost you can cut some of this out because I'm going to talk a little bit about the Kane Chronicles, but I'm using it as an example to get to my point. You know how in the Kane Chronicles where they talk about how like Egyptian influence is everywhere, and that's
Mhm.
why like the Washington Monument is able to be used as like a place for portals and
Yeah.
things like that. Um, I almost think that a better way to express the idea that I think is trying to be conveyed here
Hmm.
is more like because what they say here about like all of these like Western Europe countries, especially England, taking their cues from ancient Greece and ancient Rome because they wanted to invoke that sense of like power and influence that they believed those ancient cultures had.
Yeah.
I think there is a better way to say like it's not so much that civilization has gone through these um countries, but more as the influence of ancient Greece has persisted or has been
Yeah.
mimicked by these places. And as a result, that's where Mount Olympus as a concept has sort of landed throughout the decades and centuries.
Yeah. There's a literary movement from before the Gothic movement, which was before the Romantics movement.
I must confess, I am horrible at remembering literary
I
movements.
know, and I should remember this one.
Hold on. Literary movements.
It
Blah, 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 blah.
it was the one with Alexander Pope, neoclassicists. The
Ah,
neoclassic movement literally took Shakespeare and rewrote it to match the Greek form of plays.
interesting.
So this idea of adopting Greek versions of things is not something that is new by any
Hmm.
count. Like
Yeah.
throughout history, we being very Eurocentric ideals
Hmm.
have gone back and back and back and reproduced Roman and Greek ideals throughout all of our history. Like, look at the buildings in the United States. The
That's exactly
buildings
what I was about to say.
that we have are nowhere near what we would have had at the same time as ancient Greece because we had very different civilizations here.
Hmm.
And yet, here we are replicating those exact same style of buildings in Washington, D.C., in Tennessee, right? Like we have these
Hmm.
very out of place and awkward looking buildings for our areas.
Yeah. I actually, this is a little bit of a tangent, but I was just thinking about that this morning a little bit because Rachel knows I've been working on my scrapbook personally.
Hmm.
And I've been putting in some photos from when I did a lot of traveling in 2019. And two of the things that I did was that summer of 2019, I went to Nashville for like a weekend or a little kind of a couple days around the weekend, but whatever. And one of the things that I did there was I visited their replica of the Parthenon, which is, a replica of the temple in Athens, which was actually very cool. If you like Greek mythology or if you're a Percy Jackson fan, that is an interesting like landmark to go visit. It was like $5 to go in. So like that was really cool. And I had a picture of me standing outside the replica Parthenon, and I was like, huh, that's neat. And then I was doing some photos from when my family went to Washington, D.C. for a couple days around Christmas later that year. And I don't even remember the building. There was just like a building. And I was like, if I put those two pictures of like me outside the Parthenon versus this, whatever building it was, they look very similar.
Hmm.
Just like the columns out front and I forget what the part of the thing where it goes like this, not the roof, but like
The pointy part of the front face.
the pointy part of the front, and then you have, I think it's called a frieze, right? With the
Sure.
hold on, um, this is my mother would be so proud of me. I yeah, it's called a frieze, which is like those like the flat sculptures on the front of a thing,
Yes. Yeah.
and they're usually in that pointy part or right below it.
Yeah.
Which is very like ancient Greek architecture vibes.
Hmm.
So, anyway, total tangent, but like all that to say, you can see a lot of that influence in the United States because they're trying to invoke, like, these are the ancient powers that we are trying to invoke. And there's some problematic stuff to talk about with that, let's be real. But anyway, tangent aside. So there's a big capture the flag game at camp. Or I'm sorry, did you want to say anything else about our like intro to Camp Half Blood scene?
Oh, just as like a kind of general thought, I always really like when we have this like character is suddenly transported into a new magical area, be it an actual magical area or somebody of a lower class coming into a higher class or higher class into a lower cast or class, not cast, unless we're talking about the Merciful Crow and the Faithful Sock. Uh, but but having the using the new character as the point of exposition, because then it doesn't make the reader feel like an idiot, because the narrator is also an idiot with the main
Yes.
character and they're
We
asking
are
the questions we need.
we are all learning together.
Yes, we are all little idiots.
All little idiots. Um so yeah, Percy kind of gets his orientation to Camp Half-Blood. He gets put in the Hermes cabin, which is again where all of the unclaimed demigods go. And then the first real big event that happens is capture the flag. And Annabeth says, "Look, you stand here at this river and you guard it." And Percy's like, "Okay, whatever you say." Um, and Clarice, because she's still pretty mad about the stunt that Percy pulled on his first day. For those who don't know, Percy made all of the toilets explode in the bathroom as a defense against being bullied by Clarice, thereby embarrassing Clarice. And she is seeking her revenge. And you know what? That's fair. Um,
I'm
I
sorry,
she
that's not fair.
I know she started it, but like I can understand the thought process if that makes sense.
No.
Like that's not I didn't what I wanted to say didn't come out the right way.
It's, to me it's very much like I am looking at this situation and going, if you're gonna be stupid you gotta be brave. Like, she made
Mhm.
a stupid decision and now has to live with the consequences.
Yes. But I can also see her logic of like I'm not saying it's good or right. I'm just saying I can see the logic that she is thinking here, even though it means it's costing like her team the game because she's the one who's supposed to be leading her team and capture the flag, and she instead decides to go over this like wimp from who knows where who embarrassed her in front of the camp.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I don't mean that she's morally correct in doing so. Obviously, I'm just saying like, you know what? It makes it is very teenager thinking
Yes, it is.
and it makes sense.
Yes, it does.
um my apologies for being a Clarice apologist. Apparently
Don't worry, I'm a
was
someone else apologist.
was not my intention. Anyway, all that to say, Percy gets claimed. A hellhound comes out of nowhere, attacks Percy in the woods, and Percy miraculously survives through the help of the water in the river or the creek, whatever. Or if you're from Pennsylvania, the crick, where he's guarding the border. And the water heals him. And that is when Percy is claimed as the son of Poseidon.
Woot woot.
Rachel, you have some feelings about claiming.
Okay. Aggressively grabs my book and shakes it. So, up until this point, Percy has been kind of unofficially claimed by the Hermes cabin, right? We talked about how the Hermes cabin kind of adopts anybody that goes unclaimed. We have established this. Well, Percy specifically notes how some of the kids, well, not some of them, all of the kids in each cabin all have a distinct look to them, and specifically notes that of the Hermes cabin. On page 100, first full paragraph, back in cabin 11, everyone was talking and horsing around waiting for dinner. For the first time, I noticed that a lot of the campers had similar features: sharp nose, upturned eyebrows, mischievous smiles. These were the kinds of kids that teachers would peg as troublemakers. Not the point I'm making. The counselor Luke came over. He had the Hermes family resemblance too. So all of the Hermes kids look similar, right? Like, we can all figure out who a Hermes kid is, which to me also means you can identify who in the Hermes cabin is not a Hermes kid. So we are further ostracizing all of the kids that go unclaimed. Not only are you put in the reject cabin, you are now also unclaimed by anyone. So by that logic, it just leads me to question, like, are the other gods that have cabins at Camp Half Blood not claiming their children, and we see people in the Hermes cabin who could easily fit into another cabin and are just unclaimed by their parents? Or is everyone else in that cabin a child of a god or goddess who doesn't have a cabin at Camp Half Blood?
That's a really interesting point, and I don't know if I have a good answer for you.
It was more of a rhetorical question than anything, but this
Yeah.
is a very calm Rachel rant.
Mm-hmm. This is like a 3 on the Rachel Rant scale.
And is that like a 1 to 5 or a 1 to 10?
That's a 1 to 10.
Okay, yeah, that's like a 3. I would say that's fair.
Mm-hmm.
This isn't like I would rate the vicious as like a 9-10.
Yeah, that's like a 9 because we had to stop after that. We had to take a break and like recollect ourselves.
I needed to take a breather because I was a little heated.
A little worked up.
Little heated there.
Yeah.
But no, it kind of pisses me off because not only have you already ostracized these kids because they are going unclaimed, but if they know where they're supposed to be, or if everybody can figure out where they're supposed to be, you are just further ostracizing them and kind of making a mockery of them.
So Annabeth is the one who brings Percy to the Hermes cabin.
What page are we on?
We're on page 84. Annabeth announced, Percy Jackson, meet cabin 11. Regular or undetermined? Somebody asked. I didn't know what to say, but Annabeth said, undetermined. Everybody groaned. I do think we see later on, not so much in action, but in reference, we do see that the Hermes cabin is pretty welcoming towards Percy, all things considered.
Mm-hmm.
But just that reaction of like, ugh, another one, I think says a lot about how unclaimed demigods can feel. Yeah.
Just like
Just that was kind of to your point
just
there.
like discarded, right? Like, oh, you made
Hmm.
it to Camp Half Blood, congrats. Now wallow in your own self pity.
Yep.
I think reflecting on having finished the series, that might be the top moment where I want to go back and like smack all of the entire pantheon.
Hmm. Um, like and subscribe to our podcast if you too are down for smacking the entire pantheon of Greek gods.
I think one person might make it out unscathed, and that might be it.
That's fair.
And you know what? You know what? If we brought Percy in on this, I don't think he would join us. But hear me out. But because he would want to watch us do it ourselves. Not because he wouldn't want to join, but because he would be so happy that somebody else was on his side that he would just stand there laughing maniacally.
Mm-hmm. That's fair.
Thank you for coming to my TED Talk.
You're welcome. So after Percy gets claimed, they're all like, oh, conveniently enough, you're a son of Poseidon. Well, turns out, we think you might have stolen Zeus's master lightning bolt. And Percy's like, what? The what now? And they're like, yeah, you need to go on a quest to find it. And Percy's like, huh? Again, nobody tells this boy anything, and I kind of wish they would like keep him up to speed a little bit more. But point being, Percy has to go and get a prophecy from the Oracle, which is this like shriveled up mummy basically in the attic of the one house at camp. It's really creepy and a little bit unnerving. And then Percy, Grover, and Annabeth leave together on their quest. Um, there's a little bit of a skirmish on a bus in New Jersey with the three Furies. The one that Percy killed in chapter 1 has returned with her sisters, and they attack Percy on the bus. Um, this is just another moment of Annabeth has an invisibility cap and she gives it to Percy, saying, like, you can escape them, like, get off the bus and leave. Um, but then the Furies start to attack Annabeth and Grover, and Percy says, he has the perfect opening to leave, and he says, no, I'm not leaving them behind.
Mm-hmm.
So that's another, like, moment of his loyalty I
And
just wanted to bring up.
I want to point out Annabeth gave the hat to Percy. The hat that was given to her, the only magical item that has been given to her by her mother, Athena.
Yes. So that's a pretty big deal in and of itself, too. So then the last little bit that we get to before we reach our cutoff for this book for part 1 is the encounter with Medusa. Percy Jackson has blown up a Greyhound bus. He and Annabeth and Grover are now wandering in the wilds of New Jersey, which, I do not envy them as a Pennsylvanian. I would rather go anywhere other than New Jersey most of the time. Apologies to any of our listeners from New Jersey. I mean it in jest. A strange woman tells them, "Hey, you can come on in here. Like, I've got food, it's safe." But something seems a little bit off. Spoilers, she's Medusa, and she wants to turn them all into stone.
Dun dun dun.
Dun dun dun. Percy does defeat Medusa. It all turns out fine. But I did just want to talk a little bit about how the story of Medusa is presented in this book because it doesn't sit great with me.
There's a lot of problematic things in this whole thing, from how
Yeah,
Medusa is described to then how the story is portrayed.
yeah. Do you want to talk about like how Medusa is described quick? We don't have to, but since you brought it
I
up.
can. I had just flipped to the page, and that's one of my tabs. But
Mm,
so again, this is a place where the book is definitely showing its age. Uh,
mhm.
on page 172, it states, "Then the door creaked open, and standing in front of us was a tall Middle Eastern woman. At least I assumed she was Middle Eastern because she wore a long black gown that covered everything but her hands, and her head was completely veiled. Her eyes glinted behind a curtain of black gauze, but that was about all I could make out. Her coffee colored hands looked old, but well manicured and elegant, so I imagined she was a grandmother who had once been a beautiful lady." And then they talk about her accent being vaguely Middle Eastern as well. So we have this character who is going to be for all intents and purposes here, an evil character, right?
A monster.
Yeah. And she is described as a Middle Eastern woman. So we have
Mhm.
this more than momentary instance of Middle Eastern equals monstrous, um,
Yes.
which is very problematic.
Strongly agree, especially when you remember this is 2005 in the height of post 9/11
Yeah.
um
Experiences.
fear mongering maybe.
Yes.
So we don't like that.
No.
I can see, like, I don't want to sound defensive because that's not my intention here. I can see Rick Riordan as a writer being like, well, this character can't show her face because she's Medusa and anyone she looks at will turn to stone.
Hmm.
So I need a reason for her to keep her head covered.
Right.
Um, and this was what he came up with. I do not like, but that also, that is not so much as an excuse as it is like I can see the logic, but it was not fully thought through. And I don't think that Rick, being again a white American man, really
Hmm.
thought through the implications of what this means.
I agree. And I would say in
Which is
2005,
an indication of like implicit bias, I
yeah,
think.
in 2005 this wouldn't have been something considered problematic, but in today's society it is, and even then it was problematic. We just didn't
Mm-hmm.
recognize the problems with it. And
Correct.
I think since then Rick has done a I say Rick as if I know him.
I mean, what are we supposed to call him? Mr. Riordan?
I
That feels weirder.
I mean, we
That
could
feels
just
worse.
we could just call him Riordan, right? If we were writing this as a
Eh,
paper, it'd be Riordan.
eh.
I'm gonna keep calling him Rick. Uh,
Go on.
but I think since then, Rick has worked really hard in his writings to correct these things
Mm-hmm.
in a way that is like admitting his faults, but still producing a piece of quality work.
Mm-hmm. And that doesn't erase the mistakes that
No.
were made, but it is, let's put it this way, it's kind of the bare minimum, but
Mhm.
it is more than most other writers of this era are doing.
100% agree.
Yeah. Because I don't want to be like, well, he's doing the bare minimum, so like, yay, celebrate, but also like,
He's doing more than a lot of other 2005 authors.
yes, correct.
And I'm going to continue on this, and apparently I'm a Rick apologist, but
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if we just look at who he has chosen to support him in continuing this story, right? Like we have Marco Shiro, who is a queer author, coming on to write
Mm-hmm.
a queer character,
Yes,
right?
two
Like,
queer characters.
right. So I just think that now, you know, almost
Progress has been
right,
made.
almost 20 years later, Rick is
Mm-hmm.
recognizing areas where he might have shortcomings and is actively trying to negate them.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yeah.
apparently I'm a Rick apologist, but I don't really care.
Mm-hmm. And another thing, just on this tangent, because there is a lot of stuff that we don't like about this thing with Medusa. So after the fight with Medusa, Percy is talking with.
We didn't even
You're
talk,
waving.
yeah, we didn't actually talk about the Medusa story.
Yeah, I know. I'm getting to that.
Okay. After fighting Medusa?
Yes. So after defeating Medusa, they wrap up her head in some old plastic grocery bags because that's something. And Percy says to Annabeth, "So we have Athena to thank for this monster?" Annabeth flashed me an irritated look. This is page 185. Your dad, actually, don't you remember? Medusa was Poseidon's girlfriend. They decided to meet in my mother's temple. That's why Athena turned her into a monster. Medusa and her two sisters, who had helped her get into the temple, they became the three Gorgons. That's why Medusa wanted to slice me up, but she wanted to preserve you as a nice statue. She's still sweet on your dad. You probably reminded her of him. Which, okay, Poseidon's girlfriend? Get out of here with that nonsense. I'm sorry. I have a bone to pick with this paragraph. Like, so, like, trigger warning, I am going to talk about the story of Medusa, which does involve sexual assault and rape. So, if that's going to be triggering for you, please feel free to skip, like, the next couple minutes. But in the Lightning Thief, it makes it sound like a consensual, mutual thing. Where in like most versions of the Medusa myth, implies that Medusa was raped. I actually did write a reference down for this. So the where I remember reading this is in Ovid's Metamorphoses, and in the translation that I have, it's mentioned that she was violated in Athena's temple by Poseidon, which is just another word for assaulted or raped. And I know that we're writing middle grade fiction, but this just feels like a real disservice,
Mhm.
especially in a series in which the gods really aren't good and they're never really presented as good. They're just like less bad because Percy is rightfully angry at the gods. And that's kind of a big contentious and that's kind of a big point throughout the books is that the gods aren't great. They really screwed up a lot of things and the mortals are often the ones who have to pay the price for it, but they're not the Titans. And I don't know. Something about it makes me really angry.
So the reason I questioned after defeating Medusa is because on page 176, Medusa tells her own story.
Mm-hmm.
Right? She says it's a terrible story, Auntie M said. Not one for children, really. You see, Annabeth, a bad woman was jealous of me long ago when I was young. I had a boyfriend, and this bad woman was determined to break us apart. She caused a terrible accident. My sisters stayed by me. They shared my bad fortune as long as they could, but eventually they passed on. They faded away. I alone have survived, but at a price. Such a price. And Percy even feels bad. Like the very next sentence,
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't sure what she meant, but I felt bad for her.
I just, I don't know. This is really one of the only instances in which we get a kind of a sanitized myth. I feel like most
Mhm.
of the other ones are a little less explicitly sanitized, if that makes sense.
That definitely
But
makes
just
sense.
something about this rubs me the wrong way. And to be clear, Athena is also very complicit in this. I know that
Oh
there's
yeah.
some versions of the Medusa myth where people claim like, oh, she turned Medusa into a Gorgon so that like she would be able to protect herself from men.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know if that really checks out necessarily with some other myths that involve like Medusa and the Aegis and all that stuff.
Yeah.
It's a whole thing. I've had conversations about this with other people. But Athena also notably takes revenge on the woman who is the victim here instead of against the man who is committing the crime.
Which I think is also very reflective of the direct society that Athena is around when you think about what she kind of grew up in. And I feel weird talking about a god growing up, but like
Mm-hmm.
Hera does that all the time to the women
Yep.
that Zeus sleeps with.
That's what we talked about in the beginning of this episode with my trivia about Dionysus, right?
Exactly.
And I this is such a weird note to like be wrapping up the podcast on. I know, but like for a book series in which we talk so much about the wrongs of the gods and how the mortals have had to pay the price, like that is a major theme throughout all of the Percy Jackson books is the gods have made these mistakes and it's their children, their demigod children and mortals who have to pay the price. Why are we sanitizing this specific myth? I don't wouldn't it I know it's probably for an audience reason that this is intended for middle schoolers and if you had a book for middle schoolers, I mean, books are being challenged left and right here in 2022, but this book definitely would have been challenged a lot if there was specific mention of Medusa being the victim in this situation.
Mm-hmm.
And I understand that, but that doesn't mean that I like it.
Agreed.
And I had a point to go with this too. I will say this comes down later on that page 185 after Annabeth recounts the Medusa story. Percy says, I was angry, not just with Annabeth or her mom, but with all of the gods for this whole quest, for getting us blown off the road and in 2 major fights on the very first day from camp. Then he says, what had Medusa said? Do not be a pawn of the Olympians, my dear. You would be better off as a statue. And this is when Percy like packages up the Medusa head and sends it to Olympus. And he says, with best wishes, Percy Jackson. They're not going to like that, Grover warned. They'll think you're impertinent. I poured some golden drachmas in the pouch. As soon as I closed it, there was a sound like a cash register. The package floated off the table and disappeared with a pop. I am impertinent, I said.
I looked at Annabeth, daring her to criticize. She didn't.
Oh, I do think like that kind of brings it a little bit like it brings the idea around at least, which I appreciate,
Mm-hmm.
but yeah.
I also just, again, being the Rick apologist that apparently I am,
Mhm.
uh, I also think that if he made Medusa more relatable or more true to the original
Mhm.
myth, we would have seen Percy be more sympathetic towards air quote monsters.
Mhm.
And that would become a problem later on.
That's fair.
We can talk about what the problem is later on in
Mhm.
later episodes of the podcast.
Yes. So, but that kind of brings us halfway through the Lightning Thief and
To the end of this episode.
to the end of this episode. So, Rachel, do you have anything else to say before we go into the outro and wrap up?
I don't think so. I'm really excited for the second half of this book because we get to talk more about, I think, more about the stakes of what everything is.
Mhm. I agree.
I'm excited.
Okay. Well, we will see you in our next episode. Thanks for listening.
Bye, everybody.
Goodbye. Thanks for listening to this episode of I'm Not the Book Expert, but She Is. You can find us online at bookexpertpod.wordpress.com or follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok at bookexpertpod. If you enjoy our show, please consider leaving us a review on our website or wherever you find your podcasts. We'll see you again soon.